Coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon, the EU and the US prepare further sanctions against Russia over its intervention in Ukraine ahead of peace talks due to be held on Friday. There is optimism a ceasefire agreement can be reached. US President Barack Obama is using talks at the NATO Summit in Wales to develop a broad-based international coalition to defeat Islamic State. Plus, the UN's nuclear watchdog says activity has been observed at a North Korean nuclear site that is consistent with an effort to restart a reactor. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Friday, September 5th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime. The world leaders in attendance for the first day of a NATO summit taking place in Wales had plenty to talk about on Thursday. But two items were leading the discussions: the growing threat of Islamic State militants and also the crisis in Ukraine.
We begin with the latter and Western leaders displaying a unified front against what they see as Russian aggression. Son Jang-in starts us off.
Amid talk of a possible ceasefire between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists, NATO leaders in Wales are voicing their support for Kiev and their opposition to Moscow. The 28-member alliance on the first day of their summit called on Russia withdraw its troops from Ukraine and end what it called the illegal annexation of Crimea.
We strongly condemn Russia's repeated violations of international law. Russia must stop its aggressive actions against Ukraine, withdraw its thousands of troops from Ukraine and the border regions, and stop supporting the separatists in Ukraine.
While NATO leaders mull their options, they are set to announce a new round of sanctions against Russia that target the banking, energy, and defense sectors. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko is speaking optimistically about the chances of a ceasefire. He said a truce on ending the 5-month conflict was contingent on the outcome of a scheduled meeting in Minsk Friday, where envoys from Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe will meet for talks. Son Jang-in, Arirang News.
Now, the crisis in Ukraine is at the top of the official agenda of the NATO summit, but another key topic of concern is the threat posed by Islamic State and the question of the level of military power needed to take the extremist group down. The leaders of the United States and Britain want to build an international coalition to tackle the threat. Kwon Soo-ah tells us more.
NATO leaders are figuring out how to respond to Islamic State as it continues its rampage across Iraq and Syria and executes and threatens more Westerners. U.S. President Barack Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron want an international coalition to combat the extremist group. The two leaders outlined the need to tackle the, quote, brutal and poisonous militants and urged powerful regional players like Jordan and Turkey to join the effort. Jordan's King Abdullah expressed strong support for such a coalition during private meetings, according to participants at the summit. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said he would seriously consider requests for assistance from the Iraqi government, adding the international community has an obligation to stop IS making further gains. The British Prime Minister told CNN that his country supports U.S. airstrikes in Iraq and could take part in them, but also made clear that other factors like helping the Iraqi government and supplying humanitarian aid is just as important.
I think sometimes people think there is no strategy unless it simply consists of airstrikes. That's not the case. What you need is a fully formed strategy to squeeze this from every angle, and that's what you're getting from this conference today.
The United States and Britain need to find partners fast to form a coalition to battle IS through military power, diplomatic pressure, as well as economic penalties. Kwon Soo-ah, Arirang News.
Satellite imagery of North Korea's main nuclear complex indicates a 5-megawatt plutonium production reactor may have recently restarted. The United States says the activity merely shows that North Korea lacks a genuine commitment to abandon its nuclear program and goes against repeated claims that it's ready to return to negotiations. Shin Se-min has more.
In an annual report posted on its website, the International Atomic Energy Agency says it has seen releases of steam and water from a reactor at the Yongbyon nuclear complex. The latest update on the plant also quoted experts that said the North could be working on making plutonium for atomic bombs. The UN watchdog said it was continuing to monitor developments at the site via satellite imagery. The reactor site has technically been out of operation for years as North Korea destroyed its cooling tower in 2008 amid a trust-building phase with South Korea, China, the U.S., and other neighboring countries. In April 2013, the North said it would revive its old 5-megawatt reactor at the Yongbyon nuclear complex. Experts said then that it would take about half a year to revive the plant, but only if it hadn't fallen completely into disrepair. In January, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence said the North had enlarged the uranium enrichment facility and restarted the reactor as well, calling the moves a significant step in the wrong direction and a contrary move to the North's international commitments. The U.S. State Department said on Thursday that the activities signal Pyongyang's clear lack of commitment to denuclearization. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
South Korea has called on North Korea for the third time to accept its offer for high-level talks. The Unification Ministry said Friday that it's regrettable Pyongyang has not given a response yet and added Seoul wants an inter-Korean issues to be resolved through dialogue. South Korea proposed a second round of high-level talks last month to discuss a possible round of reunions for families separated since the Korean War, as well as other pending issues. The ministry said an answer from Pyongyang would be great news for the divided family members ahead of the Chuseok holiday. And staying on North Korea, Washington's new chief nuclear envoy says the United States has reopened the so-called New York Channel with North Korea to discuss the issue of U.S. detainees there. Sydney Seiler called the detainment of the 3 Americans a significant obstacle to improving their ties, and it looks like North Korea may have taken its words to heart. Hwang Seung-hee reports.
A matter of days after North Korea granted U.S. media a rare interview with the 3 American detainees, the United States said it had restarted its own diplomatic channel with the communist regime to secure their release. Speaking at a forum on Thursday, Washington's new chief nuclear envoy, Sydney Seiler, said efforts to bring the U.S. citizens home are being made through the New York Channel, as well as the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang. The so-called New York Channel refers to meetings between North Korea's UN delegation and U.S. officials. Seiler noted the 3 detainees have posed significant obstacles to U.S.-North Korea ties and urged Pyongyang to act in a humane and right way. Washington may not be alone in seeking to remove these barriers to friendlier ties. Letting CNN and the Associated Press interview the 3 Americans could be Pyongyang's latest attempt to push for fresh dialogue with Washington. North Korea has a history of using U.S. detainees as negotiating chips for talks with the United States. The latest developments come a couple of weeks before North Korea's foreign minister travels to New York City for the UN General Assembly. Attention is focusing on whether his trip could bring the 2 foes a little closer together. Hwang Seung-hee, Arirang News.
Now, foreign investors have been snapping up Korean stocks with increased fervour in recent months, but none more so than Europeans. The Financial Supervisory Service said on this Friday that foreign investors purchased over $2.4 billion of Korean-listed stocks in August alone, with more than half of that total coming from Europe. As of the end of August, foreign investors held more than 32%, so roughly a third of the total stocks on the Korean market were some $445 billion. Now, this is one of the busiest times of the year for markets and shops here in Korea, with people prepping for their Chuseok holiday meals. But more and more shoppers are shying away from the nation's traditional markets in favour of discount stores and supermarkets. This is a trend that the government would like to reverse as much as it can, but a new report shows their efforts have yet to bear fruit. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The government has been investing billions of dollars in the nation's traditional markets for more than a decade, but the efforts don't appear to be working to counter the rise of major supermarkets. According to data collected by Saenuri Party Representative Kim An-pyo, total sales at more than 1,500 traditional markets nationwide was slashed in half in 2013 from 12 years ago to $20 billion. They're losing business to more modern supermarkets, whose total sales have been on a steady rise over recent years, hitting $44 billion in 2013. The shift has increased costs for more government support for traditional markets. More than $3 billion of government funds have been directed toward making traditional markets more accessible by modernizing their parking lots and entrances. But lawmaker Kim in his report pointed out that the money could be invested more wisely, such as by updating smartphone application software to make it easier for shoppers to find the markets and pay for their goods. He added that more research needed to be done on finding ways to help these traditional markets. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, some good news for travellers to Korea, because starting today, duty-free limits will be raised for people coming into Korea. The move, which is part of the Finance Ministry's tax revisions, raises the duty-free allowance to $600 from $400. It's the first time the ceiling has been raised in over a quarter of a century, in fact. The government is also expected to raise the limit for travellers to Korea's resort island of Jeju early next year in January. It also plans to offer tax deductions of 30% to travellers who voluntarily report items they are carrying, while imposing additional tax on those that don't. The world's leading trade show for consumer electronics opens in Berlin later on this Friday, showcasing, as always, the latest in must-have gadgets. One of the top attractions this year are TVs. Our Hwang Jie has the details.
Some major electronics companies, including Korea's very own Samsung and LG, are set to show off their latest high-end gadgets in this year's IFA, one of the world's largest consumer electronics trade shows that's held every year in Berlin.
Of course, if you consider the trends in the TV market, it's UHD, the ultra-high definition TV sets. Of course, it's the curved TV, brand new in the market, and every of the big manufacturers will present their own curved TV. And overall, it's the connected world, connectivity. It's a big trend for everyone in the market.
And connected devices are taking center stage.
We have a Spotify Connect speaker where you can stream music through the Spotify app. We also have various Bluetooth solutions for multi-pairing. By this I mean you can connect several Bluetooth devices at the same time and also play music.
Japanese manufacturer Toshiba is no exception, unveiling a television that acts as a digital personal assistant when you team it up with a smartwatch. It also doubles up as a mirror.
If you have this digital watch, for example, then the watch sends body mass data to the TV, so you can see how many calories you used yesterday, how many steps you took, what exercise you have to do today. The TV can tell you in the morning by looking in the mirror what the weather will be and what meetings you have.
The 5-day expo kicks off on Friday with more than 1,500 exhibitors from around the globe taking part. Hwang Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, it's that time of the newscast where we check out the international headlines, the other international headlines we're following on this Friday afternoon. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news centre.
Eunice, India is on alert after the leader of al-Qaeda said it is establishing a branch there.
Right. The Indian government has issued security alerts in several states after a video featuring al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri surfaced, making that announcement. In the 55-minute video message, al-Zawahiri said an al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent would be a rescue for Muslims in Myanmar, Bangladesh, and India from injustice violence and oppression. Muslims in India have not been exempt from religious violence, especially those living in the states of Kashmir, Gujarat, and Assam. The 63-year-old former Egyptian eye surgeon also pledged his loyalty to Afghan Taliban leader Mullah Omar, altogether a move seen by some experts as a reaction to the growing dominance of the group's rival, the Islamic State. And in the fight against Ebola, an American aid agency is donating an additional $75 million for protective suits and beds in the treatment centers. The Associated Press reports nurses in Liberia only have rags over their heads to protect themselves from the highly contagious virus. The U.S. Agency for International Development had earlier committed about $20 million to fight the outbreak that has now killed more people than all other Ebola outbreaks combined. The group also said several hundred more international experts are needed on the ground. Health workers have accounted for about 10% of Ebola deaths so far. Meanwhile, a third infected American health worker has been flown to Omaha from Liberia for treatment in the U.S. 51-year-old Dr. Rick Sakra had volunteered to return to Liberia after 2 other U.S. health workers had become sick with the virus. And over to business news in Europe. In an unexpected move, the European Central Bank has cut its benchmark interest rate to record lows yet again to spur economic growth and prevent the faltering Eurozone economy from slipping back into recession. The bank lowered its main interest rate to 0.05% from a previous record low of 0.15%. ECB President Mario Draghi also announced a new stimulus program to buy financial assets in private sectors in October to spur investment and growth. The ECB made its last rate cut in June. And finally, internet giant Google has agreed to pay out some $19 million in refunds to parents who were unfairly charged for purchases built into children's video games. The settlement was announced by the U.S. Federal Trade Commission after thousands of complaints were filed by parents whose credit cards were racked up by their children playing games like Ice Age Village and Air Penguins. Google said it revised its billing practices in March so that parents are given a choice of whether or not to require a password when their kids bought virtual tools in the games.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Ujin Ju.
I'm Ujin Ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
A new report by the World Health Organization shows that 1 person dies as a result of suicide every 40 seconds. It cites mainly economic factors as the reasons for people taking their own lives and notes that 3 times as many men as women kill themselves. Kim Min-ji reports.
Over 800,000 people commit suicide worldwide every year. That means someone takes their own life every 40 seconds. A new report by the World Health Organization showed low and middle-income nations accounted for about 75% of all cases around the world. It stated the most common methods of suicide range from self-poisoning to hangings to the use of firearms. The report explained that restricting access to means of suicide is effective prevention as seen in developed countries, adding that governments need to come up with stronger measures. Only 28 countries are known to have national suicide prevention strategies. By age, the WHO said the suicide rate was the highest among those aged 70 and older, and that suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people aged 15 to 29. Margaret Chan, the Secretary General of the WHO, said the report is a call for action to address a large public health problem which has been shrouded in taboo for far too long. The WHO added that another way to prevent suicide is responsible reporting by media. The report comes ahead of World Suicide Prevention Day on September 10th, which raises awareness about suicide and suicide prevention around the world. 김민지, Arirang News.
Now, they're full of protein and easier to digest than beef, but most of us cringe at the thought of seeing them, much less than eating them. But there may be a time not so far off when we're putting insects on our dinner plates. Our Yudian tells us why.
Could we be eating insects as part of our regular diets in just a few decades? The UN Food and Agriculture Organization suggests that it might be a necessity. In a report, the agency said the world will need twice its current food supply by 2050 and said eating bugs would help stave off the effects of a crisis. And Korea is already taking steps in that direction. Officials from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said Thursday that a total of 7 different insects could be cleared for sale in markets, including beetles and crickets, by 2016. The insects might not just be used for food, but for medicinal purposes and pest control. It's an industry the government expects to grow to about $684 billion by 2020. Local hospitals like Yonsei Severance have already begun researching how insects could be included in patients' diets, as they're good sources of protein and are easier to digest than meat. Insects are also known to contain good fats that include calcium and iron. Yurian, Arirang News.
Well, now to some highly anticipated sports news, because Ulrich Stielike has been named the new head coach of South Korea's national football team. The Korea Football Association said on Friday that the 59-year-old signed a contract that runs all the way through to the 2018 World Cup finals in Russia. As a player, Stielike was affectionately known as the Stopper, and he won titles in the Bundesliga, La Liga and the Swiss Super League in the 1970s and 80s. After he was done playing, he turned to coaching, serving as the manager of the Swiss national team from 1989 through 1991 and Ivory Coast from 2006 to 2008. Stielike is scheduled to arrive here in Korea on Monday, and he will attend the friendly match against Uruguay later that day. Staying in sports-related news, and the world's largest taekwondo centre opened on Thursday in Korea's southern city of Muju. This huge new space will offer a variety of martial arts programs for people of all ages and abilities. Our Kim Hyun-bin shows us around.
Korea is the birthplace of one of the most well-known forms of martial arts, taekwondo. So it seems only right that Korea have the largest taekwondo center. The opening ceremony for this new facility in Muju, Jeollabuk-do Province, in Korea's southwest, was held on Thursday. Over 2,500 visitors and distinguished guests, including Prime Minister Chung On-won and other top government officials, attended the ceremony. Highlighting the government's efforts to make the facility a global taekwondo mecca, 200 masters of the martial art from 16 countries were given medals for their efforts to globalize the sport.
We established the Taekwondo Center to globalize the sport and make this center a mecca. To fulfill our goal, we will offer a variety of Taekwondo programs and help globalize it through international exchange.
Local residents are also proud to see such an amazing center of sporting excellence set up in the heart of their community.
As a Muju resident, I am pleased to see the opening of the Taekwondo Center. The center was established and represents Muju, the Republic of Korea, and will be a good chance to promote the sport around the globe.
The world's largest Taekwondo center is built on over 2.3 million square meters of land, 10 times the size of Seoul World Cup Stadium, and is capable of accommodating 1,400 people at once. The center also has interactive facilities where visitors and pro athletes can hone their Taekwondo skills.
Visitors can enhance their basic Taekwondo skills through numerous interactive activities and also get to spar against virtual reality fighters.
At a cost of $240 million, the center also includes the world's largest Taekwondo arena, a museum, an experience hall, and many other points of interest. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Muju.
Happy Friday afternoon. Well, thin layers of fog has burnt off here in the capital and the surrounding areas, and it's getting much sunnier as the day goes on, and other regions are also enjoying clear skies at this hour as well. So today's forecast to be brighter, and temperatures will be higher than yesterday as the highs will soar to upper 20s to low 30s across the nation. So let's take a closer look. The high in the capital will rise to 29, while Daegu will soar to 32, and Gwangju and Busan should make it to 30 this afternoon. Now for other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 27 and 29 respectively. Dokdo should see high of 28, while Mount Keungang reaches at 20 later in the day. Well, thankfully, the weather conditions should continue to be on our side. Warm, sunny afternoons will be the norm on the peninsula throughout the Chuseok holiday, and the full moon will rise at 6:05 p.m. on the day of Chuseok, which is next Monday, under mostly to partly clear skies. So you shouldn't have any problems seeing the moon when making your wishes. Well, that's all for me this week, and hope you have a wonderful Chuseok holiday.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, and happy Chuseok to you as well. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Hope you have a wonderful Chuseok holiday. We'll see you back on Thursday.
Yes, happy Chuseok, everyone. Goodbye.